Zach decides he wants to retire. Of course, that's the goal of everyone. Few people have a desire to work for their entire lives. He thinks back to his grandfather, who chose to retire around 55. But it was a different time back then when his grandfather retired. Pensions were more common, and more companies offered them. Some retirement packages were, of course, better than others, and Zach's grandfather was lucky enough to retire from a company that had a very nice package. Zach also wants to retire early, but he does not have a pension aside from some savings contributions he has made to IRAs and a 401k plan at work. One other thing is true of Zach's situation that was different than when his grandfather was working: access to the stock market. Before 1994, when Ameritrade forever changed how Americans would invest, if you wanted to invest in the stock market, you had to have access to a broker. The old images of a guy yelling, sell or buy into a telephone was how stock trading was done, and little of it happened in real time as it does now. Getting in and out of the stock market was simply not as easy as it is now before internet stock market trading happened. And now nearly anyone with an internet connection or even a smartphone can be in and out of stocks in seconds. Still, not many people fully comprehend the real power of investing in good companies or in collections of them through index funds and ETFs, also known as exchange-traded funds, that trade just like individual stocks do. Zach's grandfather was able to retire comfortably with just his pension and some regular savings he had been able to accumulate over time, and his grandfather did have a long and comfortable retirement, mainly able to do what he wanted without having to compromise much of his desired lifestyle in order to do it. That's what Zach wants too. But Zach also understands that his retirement may be able to be accomplished with much more money than he thought he may ever have. One thing Zach knows all too well, though, is that it will still be a tough and long road ahead. He has some decisions to make in order to accomplish his goal and successfully retire early. For one thing, his financial house is not necessarily in the shape it should be in order to maximize the potential of retiring early. He's taken on too much debt, and his spending generally outpaces his earning power to a large extent. Zach knows he has to fix that, and he works hard to accomplish that. He categorizes his expenses, looks for ways to reduce spending, especially discretionary spending, and sets out with a plan to dramatically free himself from his debts. He then forges ahead, putting some of his cost savings into a high-yield savings account so that he has money set aside for emergencies. He's read many articles on the subject and knows that the ideal situation to be in is to have at least 6 months' worth of his income set aside in case he loses his job or some other catastrophic event occurs. He also knows he needs to have at least 2 months' worth of his total costs in his checking account, further protecting himself from things that happen and minimizing the need to use credit to deal with them. Now that Zach is fixed many of the issues potentially holding him back from realizing his goals, he can now re-examine his financial situation and determine what's left to invest. He reads somewhere about what is called the 80-20 rule. That is, to live off of 80% of your income and save or invest the 20% you don't need. Perhaps his current situation does not allow him to start there, but the concept remains the same. Live below your means. And he sets out to begin to make that happen. Even if he can only save and invest 10%, or even just 5%, he's now on his way to something bigger. And eventually, he can do things to increase the percentage he is able to put away. Perhaps he can find ways to increase his income, for example. Perhaps he can downsize his house or move to a location where the cost of living is less. Perhaps he can drive a different car. Regardless of what he chooses to do, the point is that his mindset is changing to one that will be more beneficial and conducive to his overall goal to retire early. He also now understands the basic premise behind pay yourself first. In other words, you treat that like any other bill that you have to pay. And just like those other bills, you pay yourself as responsibly. If you don't pay your mortgage, you forfeit your house. And Zach knows if he does not pay himself, he potentially forfeits his plan to retire early. But where does Zach put the money he wants to invest? He has always been told that investing in the stock market is risky, and many people Zach has known in his life have told him horror stories of lost fortunes. When you don't have much money, the last thing you want to do is to lose what little you have. Yet, at the same time, Zach also knows that not everyone loses money in the stock market, and in fact, many people have amassed great fortunes from it. Zach knows that in order to make the most out of what he invests, he needs to learn all he can about how stocks work and how to look for investments that will fund his retirement, not take from it. He dives deep into one book that almost anyone who has been successful making money in the stock market has read, in some cases multiple times. Sometimes referred to as the Bible of Investing, Zach reads The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham, also a mentor of famed investor Warren Buffett. Zach learns terms like dividend aristocrats and dividend kings, the former being companies who have consistently paid or raised dividends over the past 25 years, and the latter being companies who have paid or raised dividends over the past 50 years. He knows this is probably a good place to start making decisions about where to put his money. He knows there will be some risk involved, but he wants to minimize it as much as he can. Zach finds certain investments that pay very high dividends. For example, he finds an investment REIT, or real estate investment trust, that pays a very high 17%. But he also understands that a less risky bet may be one only paying 3%. He understands that cash flows are an important consideration, as well as the historical growth of any investment. In order for any company to consistently pay out their dividends, big or small, they need to have a strong enough underlying business that provides enough cash flow to the company to be able to afford to continue to pay out their dividends. Zach is also fully aware that consistency and time are necessary to see his goal of early retirement realized. It is not a get-rich-quick scheme. He also knows that things will be slow in the beginning, but over time, as he develops more skills and grows his investments, he will see faster gains as time goes on. Getting to the first $100,000 will be hard, but after that, getting to the second $100,000 will be easier, and so will the third, fourth, and fifth. Getting to $1 million may seem like an impossible goal, but getting to the second million and thereafter will be considerably easier. He just needs to understand the time involved, constantly evaluate what he's doing, and stay on plan. What Zach has also done is to understand how to determine what he will need in order to comfortably retire early. He knows about the rule of 25. In Zach's current situation, his current expenses are $50,000 a year. In Zach's current situation, his current expenses are $50,000 a year. He pulls out a calculator and types in $50,000 times 25 and comes up with $1,250,000. That is how much Zach knows he will need to save in order to retire early and receive in dividends the funds he needs to replace his income entirely. Zach knows, though, that many factors over time may impact what he needs. So, in order to be on the safe side, he factors in 27 instead of 25. This is his cushion. He now needs $1,350,000 to comfortably reach his goal. Knowing this number serves as another important piece of information. It gives him a better understanding of how much he actually needs to save every month in order to reach his goal in the amount of time he desires to reach it. But Zach also understands something else that is very important. He understands about the power of compounding and what effect it has on where his numbers go. In other words, he knows that in order to get to his goal, he can accomplish it not only through money out of pocket he puts in, but also through what his investments will make over time and how he tends to those dividends he will receive. He can either reinvest the dividends into the very stocks he receives them from, or he can simply reinvest the dividends into other investments he has and accomplish the same thing. Reinvesting dividends is simply about using those dividends to buy more shares of something that creates more value. Let's say that Zach has invested in Coca-Cola and McDonald's. He gets a dividend from Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola shares are way up, but McDonald's shares are way down. It may not make sense to reinvest those dividends back into Coca-Cola. Instead, he decides to add more shares to his McDonald's stock. He has still reinvested his dividends and potentially increased the value, since he can assume McDonald's shares will eventually be worth more. Plus, he will get more dividends. Over time, Zach has also learned about another rule, the 4% rule, which says that in retirement, one should be able to indefinitely withdraw 4% of his portfolio, assuming typical returns being generally higher than the withdrawal amount, and never run out of money. But he has also learned that may not be a very good idea, since markets are unpredictable. And sometimes things happen in the markets that are catastrophic, such as the major market crash of 2008. Anyone withdrawing at that time under the 4% rule, having seen the values of their portfolios drop as much as 50%, would have incurred serious downward adjustments to their withdrawal amounts. And, at the same time, they'd be making those withdrawals at a significant loss as well. Zach knows that while even some dividends may be reduced during periods like that, or even pulled altogether, if he is invested in strong aristocrats and kings, it would be less likely that their dividends would be affected by the movements in the markets. Keep in mind that if a company you have invested in is a dividend king, it remains so regardless of any downturns in the markets over the past 50 years. And in periods of 50 years, markets have many periods of downturns. It is highly likely Zach can assume that even in the worst markets, if he has built his retirement goals around living off of dividends, that the amount of his dividends would not necessarily be impacted by the markets overall. He has chosen to ignore the 4% rule and instead has chosen to simply live off of the dividends he earns from his principal investments. At the same time, during these periods of downturns, he also did not change the way he invests. He simply stays the course, stays on plan, and changes nothing. These downturns also provide massive opportunities to increase his positions even more rapidly, potentially reaching his goals much faster. And if he has picked stocks that have paid out consistent dividends over time, it will be highly probable that he will also accumulate more dividends. While he does all of this, he also makes a very important other realization. He is buying companies, not the markets. So through the course of what he is doing, he simply continues to buy good companies, no matter what the markets do. He will get some of his shares at good prices, and others at not so good prices. But the overall average cost basis will be good if he is consistent in his buying strategy over time. More than anything, what benefited Zach the most was simply getting started and understanding that it takes time to build a portfolio and gain wealth and achieve his goal. If Zach takes the time to learn all he can retire early just like his grandfather did, and perhaps even enjoy a more comfortable retirement as a result. And Zach can very much achieve the goal of entirely living off his dividends.